James, hi, and thank you so much for joining me for this discussion on Faces of Digital Health. We've both been in the digital health and podcasting space for more than 5, 6, 7 years.
We have.
And we kind of just coordinated on LinkedIn that this is something that should have happened way long ago, right?
It should. It's crazy that we haven't talked in, we met for the first time at Health Europe, didn't we? And
Yes.
we've obviously talked and seen each other around, but the fact that we've had podcasts for 5 years and not been on each other's podcasts is, well, it's a travesty, quite frankly. So I'm glad we're correcting it now. And looking forward to chatting.
Let's go straight into your work. So you are hosting a podcast, but you are also helping companies with PR strategies through SomX. So I actually was thinking that we might dive into that a little bit more.
Cool.
What kind of challenges do you see that companies in healthcare face when it comes to PR? Where do they need most help with improvements?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think things have changed over time, and I actually wrote about this. I did an article a while ago on. I talked a little bit about like the history of PR and communications and marketing and social media and all that sort of stuff. And I guess it helps to understand the world that we've come from and the world that we find ourselves in, first of all. And when people used to think about marketing a product, or when people used to think about getting PR, historically there have always been these gatekeepers to really big audiences. And so the obvious example of that is newspapers. So back in the day, if you wanted to get your message about a B2C product, a consumer product, if you wanted to get that message out to the entire world or the entire country or entire area, you had to go via an editor of a newspaper or an editor of a trade magazine if it was B2B. And so these people just held the entire authority and route to all of your audiences. And so historically, people have talked about and think about PR in those terms. They think about pitching to an editor who holds an audience, and that was the gatekeeper to getting results. Now, that is still very much the case because things like TechCrunch, which all health tech startups want to be in, or some broadsheets that go to the whole country and from a newspaper perspective, and definitely trade magazines that go to trade audiences, those things still happen. But with the rise of social media, they aren't the only way to doing that anymore. And actually, you have the ability to build an audience yourself by essentially being your own editor and producer of content. And so it's become a very good idea to treat your company, no matter what you do in health tech or biotech or frankly any other sphere, it's become quite important to become your own production company. Find the values of the audiences that you want to reach, find what's going to entertain them, inspire them, educate them, and to actually go and create content for those audiences somewhat linked to your product. But actually, interestingly, what we see on TikTok and the TikTokification of all platforms, actually your content doesn't always need anything to do with what you do or your product. You grow the audience, you give them value, and people create positive associations with your content. So going back to your original question, what are the challenges? Navigating all of that, where do you start? What do you do? How do you define the value propositions for your audiences? How do you entertain them, educate them, inspire them? What's your strategy for that? But then actually, what's your execution of that? Are you going to do video? Are you going to do audio and podcasts? Are you going to do long form copywriting? Are you do short form? Are you going to blend all of that stuff together? Okay, well, you're going to set up a team to do that. And so another challenge is, if you haven't raised 100 million, how are you going to hire a videographer, a graphic designer, a content strategist, a PR strategist, a this, that, the other? You're going to have to set up a huge team to do that, which is why I think SomX as an agency has worked, because straight off the bat, we were really specific in health tech and biotech. So we spoke healthcare languages. We can jump on calls with people and immediately understand what they do. Okay, you're a class 2 medical device that does this, that, and the other. These are our audiences, this pharma company, this job title in the NHS. We understand that straight away. So now we're like, okay, well, we know these audiences care about these things. These are the things that we should and want to talk about. Now, artistically, how do we go and do it? And that's where the creatives come in. And so we're then a flexible resource that, depending on their budget, they can go up and down on the amount of time. But no matter how much you have, no matter how much resource you have or how much budget you have, you're getting a little bit of a graphic designer, a video editor, a content strategist, a PR strategist, a this, that, the other. You're getting bits of all of those people's time. So we can be this sort of flexible resource in, this year particularly, what has been a really difficult time for people. Budgets have been slashed, runways are being extended. It's been really tough for people that have got in-house marketing and PR and communications teams that have had to, shrink down a little bit. And then where do they get that extra capacity from? Well, actually, that's where we can help. And so, and for bigger companies, we come in and we either do a single function, or we manage multiple functions, or we sit at the strategy layer, or we go pure execution layer on video or animation or this and the other. So I don't know, I guess the challenges for people, they're broad, and figuring out a way to actually strategize all of that is definitely a big challenge. But
one thing that I'm kind of wondering, and I would love to hear your observation, is yes, you can do a lot on your own in terms of promotion, marketing, but it's that creation of that content takes a lot of time, so it's usually good to hire someone. And then the challenge becomes when you need to determine the return on investment of having that content person in-house. And that's where I think a lot of companies get stuck. That's the classical sales versus product rivalry, like who's more important. And can somebody hear you if you're in the middle of the forest thing?
Indeed.
So how do you see that companies navigate that? Where do they find the justification to invest in their in-house content? Is it all about how much the founder, the CEO actually values that? How do you help companies determine their strategies, and how do the strategies differ based on the stage that the company is in?
Okay, so let's start with how we convince people. It's a great question. And actually, I've been on new business calls where someone in the company has sort of leant back in their chair, folded their arms and said, right, convince me that spending money on marketing is a good idea. And I used to do one thing, I now do something completely different, which is to thank them for their time and say that we're here for you once you've figured out that that is the right thing for you. And I end the call there, because I have completely stopped trying to get people to see the value in marketing, because we're always, from our side of the table in delivering that service, on the back foot. Because to go to your other point about ROI, if a client is inherently focused on pure metrics driven ROI, it's very difficult to understand the value of marketing, because it has always struggled. Marketing, PR, communications has always struggled to justify its existence on ROI. There are certain leads, there are certain indicators that marketing is onto the right thing. And per campaign, you can definitely, and we definitely do, set certain metrics around certain things. But there's always an intangible element to brand, always. Brand recognition, brand value, the amount of people that see and know you and what that means when you meet them in real life at an event, or when you approach someone and they've have a first meeting and they've seen you a lot of times like before. You can't particularly add a value to this. Now, all of that can aggregate into something like top line revenue or bottom line profit eventually in that side of things. It's just very difficult to plot that all the way through your P&L. So in answer to one of your other questions, how much does it matter that the founder or CEO knows and cares about it? The answer is an enormous deal. Because if you look at the clients that get the most from us, it's the founders, the CEOs that are bought in. And actually, our biggest client is it's a biotech company. The CEO is from marketing. So the CEO moved up to CEO from marketing. So inherently just understands value in a different way to someone that had perhaps been from a CFO going into it, who will be far more attentive on those financial metrics and what that means. Okay, what's this spend going to, and how many things are we getting for this, and how many leads have I got per this and this and the other. And, you know, we often have to try and justify ourselves and justify our existence with impressions and engagement rate and all these things. But what I say to people all the time, like when people become new clients, is that if we don't think we can help you, we're just not going to take your money. And ultimately, we can give you indicators towards success. But frankly, if we don't meet your business goals, you're going to sack us anyway. So tell me the business goals. Because if what they want is leads, if what they want is convert or nurturing people in the pipeline towards the end, or indeed they just want new clients and contracts, whatever it is, whether it's all, and I've picked revenue there as like a sales and revenue. But if those are their goals within sales and revenue, actually what we can do at SomX is not necessarily build them a content plan and a PR plan and all these things. We could frankly just introduce them to 6 people that meets their 12-month targets. And then I can actually spend their budget on the marketing, which I know myself is going to help them in, 4 or 5 quarters time, or 2-3 quarters time, depending on like what the arc is. So the metrics thing is always difficult. Rory Sutherland is, a relatively famous marketer, works for Ogilvy, founded their behavioral science part of their business, and he talks about this a lot, that actually, for CMOs or CFOs or CEOs that are too focused on the metrics, you're just missing what the actual value of marketing is. And talks about opportunity cost and this, that, and the other. But yeah, really difficult when people don't get it innately, which is why basically we've stopped trying to convince those people, and actually we just focus on the people that already know the value that we can provide. And the easy one is your competitors are doing it anyway, so you might want to get on board.
What would your advice then be in terms of when should a company do its own marketing, and when does it make more sense to hire an agency? Or say somebody is not trustful towards agencies, thinking that they are not specific enough, that they don't know your company enough, and they come to you and say, okay, we just want to do it ourselves. What do you suggest we do? What would you say?
So I think, obviously, right at the start, first of all, let's talk about what stage, right? The obvious one is when you can't afford an agency, you need to do things yourself. And so what we say to all really early companies, 2 founders getting together with an idea, they want to do something, they want to, increase awareness, or they have a goal that marketing can achieve. The very first thing to do at that stage is just get your basics right. And this is something that anyone can do. You can Google it. It's a really easy thing to do, but start with a messaging house. So a messaging house, it's shaped like a house. It's an industry term. The roof is your vision and mission. And then you've got sort of pillars that make up the house, which are your key messages and your proof points. Key messages are 3 to 5 things that you want to say that represent broadly what the company is about, and those are the 3 to 5 things you want to be known for. So they can be drawn from some of your values, maybe the strength of the founding team. It might be something specific about the product or the market or the bit that you corner, or whatever it is, like 3 to 5 messages that you're going to say loads. Underneath each of those messages are your proof points. So everything that makes those key messages defensible, every bit of data, every anecdote, every story, anything that makes those key messages defensible. So now you've got a messaging house, you've got the blueprint of communication. So you want to be really repetitive on those things. The next thing you want to do is an audience map. So any audience that you care about at all, doesn't need to just be customers, you plot out, you write them all down, and you want to be as specific as possible here. So you want to go granular to like job titles as much as you can, even specific humans if you really want to go that specific. But then plot their pain points, plot your value propositions to them, which key messages are most appropriate from the previous exercise, and then crucially, in the final column of this table is where do they absorb information. And you want to go from like a PR perspective, so what publications do they read, what what YouTube videos do they watch, what events do they go to, but then also from like a content perspective, you know, which social platforms are they mainly on, what hashtags are they likely to follow, all this sort of stuff. So now you've got a very data-driven grid approach to communications, because you go, what are my business goals? So if your business goals are to raise investment in the next 9 months, okay, let's go to the investor line. What's their pain point? What's the value, your value to them? Okay, we're a fast growing investor, you know, great company in this space doing this thing, potential to do okay, great. Where do they absorb information? LinkedIn, these trades, great. Let's write a press release and send that to blah because we've done, you know, this thing which this publication likes, and let's do content streams on this, which will point towards investors. Right, who else? Customers. What do they care about? And that's how this is. And then you develop a content plan and a PR plan from those things. Now, again, that doesn't have to be really involved. It can be pretty basic. Okay, if we say these things on LinkedIn, that will hit these 3 audiences, and we'll do one audience, so, you know, on a Wednesday, then on a Thursday, then on a Monday, and that'll be our content plan, and we'll just do a post like that 3 times a week. And from a PR perspective, again, Google had to write a press release, and journalists actually like it when agencies don't send the press releases. Journalists actually like it when the founders do, because it actually just shows that it's them and they're not, you know, going through a middle person and that kind of thing. So I'd always say do that sort of thing first, because actually the thing with hiring an agency as well is that you want to know, you want to have a bit of a feel for what you're asking of them and what their offer is to you. I remember speaking to Patrick from Sano Genetics about this when he came on my podcast, and he said that as a founder, and forgive me, Patrick, if I get this number wrong, but as a founder, you need to be basically 80% good at everything. And I really related to that, because actually, you know, if someone like the CEO knows the basics of marketing and PR and communications and has done that 80-20 exercise and has got 80% the way there with 20% the effort, well, actually, now when the agency sits in front of you and says, okay, yeah, we're health tech experts, we're biotech experts, and we can do this, and this for this price, it's going to take us this amount of hours and we're going to charge you an hourly rate, you've sort of got a feel for like, well, actually, either you might say, well, that means your hourly rate is this, and actually, why should it be? Because and you can figure that out in a blended way. But also, you can have a fair stab at negotiating with them in a really meaningful way and working with them to say, well, if we're doing all this long form video, well, actually, you know, we can actually take that in and turn that into long form written and chop that up. So can we come down on this because we have internal capacity with this graphic designer as well, and blah blah blah. So knowing a lot about it and doing that initial bit yourself, you'll have far better negotiating power and positioning for when you do hire your agency. And in terms of like, could you get too big to have an agency? The answer is no. The agency is always going to play a role, and that's because, and I was talking to Jessica, my co-founder and wife, about this, like, in order for an agency model to work, in my opinion, the only way that works is if you assemble a team that would be so unbelievably expensive to hire that it only makes sense to assemble that team as the agency and then sell parts of their time to other people. And then that's how you make your margin. Because if you just do a function that could be absorbed internally, what's the point of the agency model? It doesn't really make sense. And so that's why we're always trying to hire best in class of everything, so that we've got this team of experts. Because then, again, the way our business model works is, for our design, videography and animation team to do something, it will take them far less time than it would do for any internal single person you had that sort of does all of that themselves. It's the agency model only works if paying us to do it is ultimately cheaper and better quality than if you even tried to do it yourself. And that works at every single level. And by the way, the time to sack your agency is when you think, I could bring this in-house and do it cheaper and higher quality, because then that agency does not work for you. That's not the right model. So always go to the agency knowing and thinking that they are the experts and they're going to teach you something. They're going to be able to, I usually say this at the start of SomX, like, the reason that it works is because they come to us because they want to be told how to communicate. Like, we need to be able to tell them how to communicate. If we don't know the health tech and biotech space better than them, then we're screwed. Like we're not going to have a business.
Speaking
So,
of specific domains such as healthcare and biotech,
mm,
where do you see that, or which channels seem to
mm,
work best in health tech? Because if you want to address clinicians, doctors, they're
mm,
more of an exception than the rule, I would say, on
mm,
LinkedIn.
yeah,
In the past, I know that Twitter was a great channel
yeah,
for them, but I'm not sure what's happening now with X and just the decreased reputation of the
yep,
platform.
yep. I hear you.
So how do you see that challenge? The fact that the sales cycles are long in healthcare, that the end users are hard to access. I don't know how many NHS people, you're from the UK, really spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. So to which
Yep,
extent would you say that's the right channel?
cool. So, question one: which channels for health tech? The answer is always it depends on the audience. So different audiences will absorb content in different ways on different platforms. And this is where the line between content and PR is blurred. Ultimately, we all, as whatever hat we're wearing, we absorb content on different platforms in different ways for different reasons. Sometimes I read TechCrunch, sometimes I look at TikTok on my phone, sometimes I watch a YouTube video, sometimes I scroll on LinkedIn. But those are the places that I am. So if I'm a customer for you, those are all places that you could play. However, I'm on different platforms contextually based on what sort of headspace I'm in. So am I in a buying mood on TikTok? Not for a B2B SaaS platform that can make my agency better, but maybe I am for a nice chunky jumper. Maybe I am in a buying mood for that, more so on TikTok. So it's being appreciative of what audiences you have, where they spend their time, and where are they in a mood receptive for your messages. Because whilst every investor will probably be on Instagram, they're not going to be looking for the next best investment on Instagram that's going to be fed a paid ad in that sense. So
I feel like challenge questions, you know. So tell me, if we think of B2B vendors, healthcare IT companies,
yep,
health tech companies
yep,
that really need to sell things to public healthcare systems through tenders.
yep,
So really long processes, very bureaucratic.
yep.
What role does TikTok play in those companies?
Right now, it doesn't play. It doesn't. Well, I say it doesn't do anything. So there are always going to be first movers. There are always going to be people that claim the initial value of moving to a new platform. So what's the value of TikTok in that scenario, selling to public health vendors? It's difficult to say. I think if you were one of the maybe like AI co-pilot like scribes, you could probably do some really, and I'm sure, you know, like the likes of, you know, Tortoise and Heidi and that lot, like they're doing a lot of B2C platform stuff, and sort of why not? But then their targets are clinicians, and actually, you know, public health systems is more secondary. So TikTok, I don't know. I don't know whether you should be.
It would be a missed platform. Which one would you recommend?
LinkedIn. 100% LinkedIn. 100% LinkedIn. For anything along those lines. Anything when you start the sentence with B2B, like you cannot look past LinkedIn. It's where everyone B2B is in the mood to look at that stuff. But cutting through on LinkedIn is your challenge.
What's your advice for people, founders, companies getting to influencers or podcasters? You mentioned already that journalists prefer an in-person connection. So if a founder
Not always,
makes
but they like it, yeah.
So tell me more about that. So
Okay.
where do you see the pitfalls? Where do you see the successes?
In
You know,
pitching, yeah.
yeah, because in my experience, what still works best is a recommendation from somebody I already know
Of
and
course.
trust.
Of
Because
course.
there's too many pitches, even if it's personal, even if it's from a PR person, it's pretty much the same in my view. If, my focus is elsewhere, it's just I'm not gonna really take the time to look at all the requests.
No, I agree. And you and I mean, we'll get pitches all the time, and this is the sort of the beauty of doing what I've done. Like because I wrote for Forbes for a while, like as a contributor, so people were pitching me stories all the time, and obviously having the podcast, people pitch like guests in all the time and stuff. So I guess you and I will have seen so many pitches, so we've got a good idea ourselves, and so actually I've often, and we do this all the time, like we go through my pitches at SomX, and I send the best pitches to our PR team and say, this is why this was a good pitch for a podcast. And actually we've now somewhat templated that, but the long story short is that, well, the one major piece of advice that I would give, there is no shortcut. There is no mail merge, hello first name, I saw your latest episode on insert episode. Yeah, you're rolling your
I
eyes,
love
right?
it when I get a pitch, when somebody says, I really love what you're doing with, and then it's not my
Puts the wrong
podcast.
podcast. Yeah, happens all the time. Yeah, happens all the time. Yeah, it's so easy to see through that stuff, and I think for B2B SaaS founders, like, of course that's where your mind goes. If I just get a list, let's get the media list, let's get the list of all the podcasters, get their emails, mail merge a thing that says we enjoyed their last episode on, get ChatGPT to riff on something about the title and blah blah blah. Trust me, even if you've used ChatGPT, we can tell. And so I think the real value in a pitch is individually, like, first of all, just turn off the internet. Just disconnect yourself, so you've got no ability to do that. Put yourself now in the shoes of that person and exactly what their job is, and now write something that is purely of value to them with the asset that you have, which is the guest or the press release or the whatever it is. And now purely put yourself in the mindset of, how do I help this person at the other end of the email with this thing that I have? So get out of your head that you're going to get into TechCrunch, you're going to get your guest into the podcast, which can be amazing for you. Like, get that out of your head. Your goal right now in this email is to give that person the most amount of value you can possibly give them with this asset that you have. So if it's a podcast guest, and you'll relate to this, is if someone says something along the lines of, you know what, I've listened to the last few episodes of your podcast, and I know that your structure is, and I'm talking about my podcast there, I know that your structure is you spend half the time talking about the guest and their background if it's interesting, and then half the time on their company, and you pull out a few themes. This is why this guest would be really good, because actually in the first half you could talk about this, and this, and it'd be really interesting because they've just done these three things. Now, when you move on to the company and talk about this, I think it's super relevant, because I know that you've talked about these three competitors before, and all of a sudden this is now completely different, because now I know why it's interesting. I know that they've actually listened. I know how this guest fits into my structure and why it would be good. This is an easy yes for me, because that person is just focused on pure value of, like, making my life easier. This person just, slips in and is all good. What I don't want to sort of lean on too much though is, like, I don't want to give the impression that, like, oh my God, like, I'm so amazing, this pitch needs to be perfect in order for me to take it. That's not true at all either. Like, we go through the list of applications on our application form and on the website, and we'll pick things out, and people can people can ask questions too, like, hey, I've got this guest, this is why I think they'd be interesting, like, is there anything that you need as a pitch or anything like that? And of course, answer those and that kind of thing. So we'll also try and find the value as much as possible as well. So it's not all on this, but I guess I'm highlighting that kind of perfect pitch as an example of, like, we're just people too doing this in basically our spare time as podcasters, and so anything you can do to make it easier for us and just prove to us that this is going to be a great episode, and don't just focus on, like, why it's going to be great for you, because as soon as you've pitched some, like, random cybersecurity thing in without mentioning Healthtech once, I'm like, well, obviously this is nonsense. So just focus on the value for the other person as much as possible.
Yeah. Personalization, which is tricky because if you
It
didn't do your
is.
homework well enough, then you can claim something is in my interest and you lost
Mm,
me completely if that is kind of a misinterpretation.
yeah, it's true. No, it's true. It's
Um,
true.
Speaking of your podcast,
Mm.
what are some of the latest trends, in 2024 that you are observing? What kind of impressed you this year when you were doing content for the
Mm.
podcast?
Yeah, nice question. So um the trends of this year. Well, I mean, it has been a really tough year for startups. As I said before, like runways extending, things getting more difficult, budgets going downwards, people trying to do more with less has been the general theme. I think in the COVID post COVID era, there was so much energy around ideas. I just felt like new ideas were everything. They were exciting, and people were getting investment from people that had never invested in health tech, and we had that like investment bubble. And I think lately the ideas side of things just hasn't really been that exciting, as in there have been new ideas, and obviously like large language models have come in and there's been lots of ideas around what large language models can do. But I think there's been this really, you might call it healthy dose of like cynicism that's now come in with regard to new ideas, and actually it's been far more about revenue and execute. I was on a call earlier like with someone looking to do a seed or a series, early series A or something, but they were talking about like, they brushed over the fact like, yeah, we've done like 2 3 4 like 2 3 million, we might, probably going to do 4 5 next year, but and then they moved straight on to like other things that would compel the investors as like building their investor narrative. And it's like, hold on a minute, we're now in a world where talking about millions of revenues, like that's not the biggest thing on the table for like getting a decent sized seed or series A and that kind of thing. It's becoming, it's definitely become a lot more difficult to get investment. And of course, like, for us, our main clients are startups, right? So the majority of our clients are health tech and biotech startups. And so we're basically paid by the VCs who are paying the startups who pay us. So
Hmm.
ultimately, any drop in VC markets affects us at the end of it. And so what we've noticed is, I guess, we've started to have bigger companies come from bigger agencies, the global agencies that, arguably might be a bit more bloated, a lot more people, a lot more kind of non-billable stuff in their business model, coming down to us and saying like, hey, we just need real practical delivery on this, on loads of this kind of stuff. So again, from the startup perspective and startup angle, like a real focus on like execution, just execute this business goal with this resource against this metric, and very sort of like point and shoot project work, I think has gone up, which I think is very sensible, by the way, from startups. And you talked earlier about like being deployed against certain metrics, and do we struggle? Yeah, I mean, on a project basis, I actually think it's very sensible to try and do that as much as possible. And we've actually pointed people towards agencies that are better suited to a kind of shorter arc of results as well, because we focus a lot on retainer, like organic stuff, over time, whereas sort of someone came to us, a big sort of data company came to us and said, hey, we need these results over the next 6 weeks. And I actually said, talk to my friend Josh over at this paid ads agency, because they specialize in the type of thing that's like, they were like, we need this amount of leads over this amount of time. And it's like, yeah, there's other people better at this than us. And actually, I'd recommend these guys because I've seen what they've done with XYZ companies. And so,
Challenging question. When a company is bootstrapping and they're trying to use internal resources
yeah,
to just raise awareness about the company,
yeah,
it's also usually good to have like internal champions for social, people that will drive thought leadership, because that's not what marketing
yeah,
can
yeah.
do. That's something that leaders need to do. How do you turn people that really don't want to do that into being at least aware that they should at least do something?
Yeah,
Because there's a lot of theory out there on how do you
yeah,
succeed in messaging, etc. But if you're not at least a little bit interested in that,
yeah,
then it's really, really difficult. The company can just spend marketing budget on internal professional education for people to know what tricks to use on LinkedIn, but then people are not going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's your advice?
So firstly, what I will say is the importance of this is increasing, and it's increasing right now as you and I are sitting here speaking. The importance of doing this is going up because we know that, especially on platforms like LinkedIn, personal content is doing way better than company content, and it's way easier to build audiences as individuals. And so, you know, even from a SomX point of view, like we're helping founders, CEOs, C-suites with their personal content plans as much as we are now helping them with company content plans, because people want to hear from people, and that's ultimately it. Now, in terms of the internal job of convincing your employees that it's a good idea, I actually have quite a specific view on this, and it might be contrary to what you think, which is actually you can't.
No, I actually expected that.
Yeah, you can't. Well, maybe that's not the bit. You can't, and you shouldn't either. I don't think. You certainly shouldn't mandate people to do it, in my opinion. Now, some people will do that, and it works. They'll mandate people to do it, and actually, that's just enough accountability for those people who would want to do it anyway, but they'd find every excuse not to do it. And individually they feel the benefits having been mandated to do it, so everyone kind of wins. So I get it as a model. I just personally don't run SomX that way. I don't think that's the right thing to do, because I just don't believe on a moral ground that I have the jurisdiction over someone else's method of communication to the world. Like I think that's a strange place for me that
But do companies actually mandate? You actually have experience when companies would mandate publishing?
Yeah.
Because it's still a personal.
I know of it.
Profile.
Yeah, I know of it. I mean, you can mandate it. You can strongly suggest it. It can be named in OKR. I mean, there's lots of different ways that people can do that, I guess. But I do just firmly believe you don't have the you don't have the jurisdiction over there as a founder of a company to do that. Now, the other thing that I would say is, if it's going to be beneficial to the company, I think as the company founders, the owners, the CEOs, the C-suite, the chief of people, or whatever role is, chief of staff, I think incentivizing people to do it is the right answer. And again, that's not bribing people, that's incentivizing people. So I think if the leadership of the company are incentivized towards an exit, and as part of that exit, you need to increase your revenue, and as part of increasing revenue, you need to bring in new customers. And in order to bring in new customers, you need more awareness. And a good way of getting more awareness is getting impressions on LinkedIn. Then a decent leader within a company will note all of that. Now, they might not act just on that. They might have more specific incentives around part of that. So they might be incentivized around business brought in. You know, if they bring the lead in and the sales team close them, they're going to get incentivized. Now, what's a great way to bring leads in? Hey, do 4 LinkedIn posts a week on various things that educate, entertain, inspire your customers. So there you've created an incentive for that leadership to do it anyway. Now, the interesting thing is, when individuals post on LinkedIn, everything gets better for the individual anyway, because that individual gains an audience that they own. The individual gets notoriety and awareness of their own personal brand. You can then mix in your own content streams about literally anything you care about or want to talk about or want to entertain on, or whatever it is. You can mix that stuff in with other stuff that brings in customers, and you're going to receive the benefit of all of that too. So I think there's an education piece there around like the value of personal content. You know, every opportunity that I've had in Healthtech has come from starting posting on LinkedIn in 2012. Like, had I not have started posting on LinkedIn in 2012, like none of this stuff would have happened for me. And so I firmly believe in the power of content for the individual. And I think there's that Richard Branson quote, isn't it, where it's attributed to him of like, you know, train people well enough so that they leave, but treat them well enough so that they stay. And I think that's what you want. Like, you want to tell people, like, by the way, guys, like, you post on LinkedIn all the time, and you're going to have so many opportunities that if you wanted to go on to do bigger and better and more wonderful things than being here on our journey, like, those opportunities will be available to you. Like, I still encourage you to do it, because it's going to benefit you, it's going to benefit me, and everyone's going to be in a better place afterwards. So, like, I guess it's that.
It's like that quote, when somebody says, what if we invest in this person or in these people and they leave? And the answer to that is, what if you don't and they stay?
Absolutely. And you had the value of them while they were with you, and that you should, when people leave, pat them on the back and thank them and tell them that they did everything that they like. This is the thing. I think people can get too tied up. If someone is that valuable to you, by the way, like, why aren't you just meeting with them all the time to find out what motivates them and what they need from their job and all that side of things? And no one works well under duress, and actually you want to leave the door open for people. And of course, if someone's going to be better off individually in their own career and everything somewhere else, like, again, taking your founder of a company hat on and just putting your human being hat on, why would you want to stop that and get in their way? Like, yeah, okay, there's two modes of thinking there. Of course you're going to be disappointed, and of course you're now going to have to do a lot of work to replace that person, but ultimately sometimes there's heart and head both working for people. Their heart might want to stay, but their head thinks they've got to move on to get a better opportunity or a different opportunity, or move sector, or get different experience. You can't have people in their 20s and 30s forever. Like, it's just very unrealistic. And so yeah, if telling them to post on LinkedIn is gonna kick them out the door, then you definitely shouldn't be doing that.
Going back to Healthtech, are there any expectations or predictions that you have for 2025 in terms of investments? Things have settled down a lot in 2024. They're going back to, some people say, normal levels, unhyped levels. So what do you see in the upcoming year or more? What do founders say or hope? How are people preparing for the future?
I think
the end year coming to an end.
Another good question. I generally stay away from predictions, but I think one thing that will happen is, one thing that I definitely perceive is, AI as a term will become almost cringeworthy. People will really stop using the term AI, and they're going to start to be really specific. Instead of AI, they're going to say computational pathology. We do computational pathology. They're not going to say we're an AI company that does blah, blah, blah. Like, people are going to get really specific on this, because I think the whole world is becoming far more educated, and then especially the tech world is becoming very educated on varying types of AI. Because it's always, what do you mean by that? And to my point around people caring more about execution now, it's actually less about the funky technology that's doing the thing. It's just, what outcome are you creating here? What service are you providing ultimately? What service does this technology fit into, and what does that service do for my overall business? And it's that. I think people, and I like this, by the way, that LLMs hit the public domain, all of a sudden, lots of people in the country and in the world start using ChatGPT, and they realize, right, here's a front end to AI. They're now interacting with AI. So now there's this like broad understanding somewhat, or comfort level, with what AI is and what it can do and that kind of thing, give or take the hallucinations and the limitations and all the rest of it. But there's a far more open dialogue about what AI is. It's no longer reserved for just the tech world anymore. But what that means is, the sort of illusions and the mysticism around the term AI are certainly less so. I think for the more educated within technology now, we're far more interested in, like, what's the and? Like, I care less that it's AI, because I know what AI is broadly, or I think I do. I care less about that now. What is this actually? Okay, it's AI. What are you driving in terms of change, and are people comfortable with it? And so we're a lot deeper into that conversation now, which I think is really good. Obviously the LLM hype's gonna, well, we'll see. I think it might die down. I can't really see us getting overly hyped about it. But as we move towards LLMs becoming medical devices, I think that's going to be a really, really interesting thing to watch. Again, a lot of dialogue around the co-pilots being medical devices and that kind of thing. But I also, I've talked about co-pilots a few times on this. Instinctually, I just feel like they really do change healthcare for the better if we can get them right. And there are instances, Tortoise working with, Great Ormond Street is a good example of deployment in the NHS. Like they can work, and actually, I want to see that day. I want to see that day that we're with my clinician hat on now, that we're just not burdened with that. Like God, like it just changes things so drastically. A huge burden lifts.
Well, it's good to see that there's optimism on the horizon. One of the things that I think surprised me lately was the realization of how important the network and the hospital infrastructure is. So, for example, if you don't have an updated computer, if the computer is too old, if the Wi-Fi isn't there, or if the connection is patchy, even good solutions can look clunky.
100%.
But it's not really the solution's point. So, the whole architecture in the hospital is such an important middleman that we often don't really talk about when we're talking about tech solutions.
By the way, I think that's such an important point, because actually one thing that I think we are still lacking, and I know there's a lot of work going into this, is trust in new technology. And one of the things that builds trust in new technology is frankly just that it works all the time. And so if you get to a platform and it doesn't work and it's slow and it crashes, all of a sudden in healthcare, on the ground floor, clinical healthcare, that clinician has now just lost trust with this completely, because it needs to work the first time, and it needs to work every time. And that infrastructure point is huge to building this trust, because, it was the internet and it was the internet service provider, or it was the router or whatever. It wasn't actually my tech. No one cares. The fact is I couldn't use your tech and now I don't want to use it. And I'm going back to my bleep because my bleep works.
Well, James, thank you so much for your time today. As
welcome.
I said a few episodes again, I really need to do an episode on business continuity and how things look like when systems go down and the workflows go back on paper. But for today, thank you so much for all the insights. I hope people got a lot of notes around PR and messaging and what they can do. And I look forward to, meeting you again at...
You're very welcome. We will meet again on my podcast and you can tell me your story.
Ooh, it's a good one.
Awesome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.